Well, good morning. It's Friday morning, and it's about 9:30. Yeah, give or take. And since I finished the electrical work on this guy yesterday, as far as I could go, I'm going to try to hang this rear fender. And if I can get this fender mounted, then I can try dropping on the Fastback rear section. We'll see how it goes. Over here on the bench, I've got a collection of parts. This I know, I'm 99 and 44 100% sure. This goes over the rear frame loop, okay, to the fender. These actually match the hole pattern in the back of the, can you see in there? Let me do a little zooming here. Okay, these actually match that hole. So I'm going to try these, one or two thicknesses, since I have four of them, and see if that matches the fender. I thought that the fender mount was this one, but it doesn't match anything, so I'm going to leave it aside. I've got some nice foam-backed or adhesive-backed foam for use underneath of this part to protect the frame paint. I'm going to use 4 new nuts and bolts that are American rather than British. I've got these spacers that came in. I'm going to see what they look like. And I'm going to see if I can get that rear fender installed so that I can try to install the tail section. So that's what I'm going to do this morning. And I'll let you know how it works out. Okay, here we sit broken-hearted. I'm not going to finish that little limerick. Apparently this does not go under the bar to hold the fender on like I thought it did. In other words, it doesn't do this, okay? It actually does this, or this to hold the tail section on. So I was wrong. It doesn't hold the fender on per se. It holds the tail section on per se. And apparently this is used for that hole, just one bolt. So one nut. We got a stud over here that this guy fits on pretty nicely. Looks like it goes on like this. So I'm going to try that. And this front stud goes through this one hole on the fender. The front only has one hole here, and it may or may not match the hole in this bracket here, which on my later model bike is for hanging the horn. And these 2 bolts are used on my 74. Now, first, before we go much farther, I'm going to tell you that Kevin and I have 2 incredibly firm rules in my shop and his. Rule number 1 is no painted parts on the bench, which I'm currently violating right now. I have a painted part on the bench. Bad thing to do. Keep painted parts away from your bench. You never know what's going to happen to them. I'm going to be incredibly careful with this. That rule started several years ago when I put a client's gas tank on my bench, not realizing that the towel that I always have down had some caustic substance in it, probably carb cleaner or gasoline or something, and that tank had been painted with spray cans, rattle can paint. It looked really good. So I laid it down there upside down, and when I picked it up, the paint had been destroyed. So that's why I set that rule, no painted parts on the bench, ever, 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 and Kevin has bought into it fully, completely, totally. The second rule that Kevin and I have agreed on, and we both bought into thoroughly, is no matter what you're doing to a bike, no matter how small the job, no matter how innocuous, pull the fuse out of the bike. Never work on a bike for any reason at all with the fuse installed in the electrical system live. So we bought into that thoroughly. So those are 2 good rules that we really recommend. No painted parts on the workbench, and always pull the fuse no matter what it is you're doing. So, okay, now having said that, I think that I've figured out how this goes on, and I'm going to try it. I'll show you the difference. First of all, like I've said many times, I have never worked on a real honest-to-gosh Fastback before. They seem to be the unicorn of Norton's. And this fender, even though it, I don't know if it's Fastback fender or not, but it seems to be, doesn't have the same holes in the front to match the mount that my Roadster, my bike was a Roadster, and I put the tail section on it back in, oh God, I can't even remember when I put it on. It's been such a memory. Anyway, that's how I confirmed that the bracket in the back does go up and hold the tail section. Now, let me see if I can get some light up in here. The tail section and the fender, there's just one bolt right there, and I think that's the first one. Bolt or stud. And the front, my poor dusty bike, I'm ashamed to show this to you. The front on my bike, I don't know if you can see in here, has two, let's see, how am I doing this? This is difficult. Can you see it has two bolts or nuts coming through there, and one up here. So I've got to figure out if this is translatable to the bike that I'm working on. My bike is a 74. This is a Roadster Roadster rear fender with a later model Fastback rear fender that I put on. And it's been so long, I don't remember what I went through to get it on. I do know that I had the Fastback underneath of the bolt here so that the seat knob is not tightening it, it's tightened by the bolt. And I'm going to assume that's the proper way of doing it, both sides. And my poor dusty bike, I'm ashamed to show it to you. I haven't fired my bike in over 2 years. It's just sad. Gas tank is drained, and it's also lined. It's a beautiful lining. I'll show you the lining because it is just a gorgeous lining, done by a company that no longer does linings. But just in case you want to see what a really nice lining looks like, let me show you the inside of my tank. Let's see, can you, oh, let's turn the light on. Okay, wonder why that was so dim. Look at that lining. Isn't that beautiful? That's an epoxy lining, and it was done by Gas Tank Lining Company in California. That's their name. And COVID pretty well hurt them badly, and they lost their staff. I don't know if they're back in business or not. Gas Tank Lining Company in California. Just Google it and see, because the lining they do is a work of art. It is gorgeous, and they bring it all the way up into the neck, and they will do your tank. They would do your tank. They did do your tank, guaranteeing that they would not damage the paint. They could do that lining and guarantee they not damage the paint, which is really neat if you have, for example, a patina tank like this, and you want it lined. They'll do it and guarantee they won't damage the paint, which is really neat. Now, on the other hand, they were very expensive, but boy, are they worth it. So anyway, that's where we are. I'm going to try putting the tail section on. I'm going to put it underneath the bolts here. I'm going to try putting the clamp up and seeing if the stud will go through here so I can put a nut on it. And then I'm going to try to see if I can make the front mount match the single hole that's in this tank somehow. That's where I am. This is going to be a fun day, and I have to do all of this without damaging any of this gorgeous paint. The fun just never stops. And before I do any of that, I got to run another wire. This thing apparently uses a tail light and a brake light, but no ground. And you know me, I don't like not having a ground wire. So I'm going to have to run a real ground wire all the way up through this tubing to the taillight. And the ground wire has to be red, which means whatever this red wire is has to be changed out. This is probably taillight since it's, or this is brake light since it's brown. This is probably the taillight for some reason. Things I don't understand. Anyway, I want a red ground wire up here. I want the brown brake light up here, and I want the brown and green taillight going up here, so the color codes are correct. I'm going to do that first, then I'll start hanging this assembly and see how it goes. And the fun just never stops. Okay, so I wanted to double check, make sure that the brown wire is in fact the brake wire, and the red wire was in fact, or is in fact, the tail light, and the fact that they were using the frame ground for the ground, which I don't like. So I've got positive going to the ground, and look, we're going to see which one's the brighter of the two. Okay, that's a nice tail light, so that's red. So we'll change out that. We'll make this wire brown with green trace. And then this one, brown, is in fact a nice bright brake light. So brown is supposed to be brake light. We'll leave that alone. And we'll splice in right here where they did. We'll cut this and splice in brown green for the tail light. And then I'll run a separate wire all the way up here and hook it, come through here and solder it to the frame, so we have a separate red ground wire when we put the tail light on, and we don't have to worry about grounding it to the frame. So just double checking and making sure that I had the wire color codes correct. I'll let you see the results eventually. All right, just an interim step here. I actually used the red wire that was here and just soldered it to the outside of the socket. I used the Dremel tool to grind away a little bit of this chrome, because chrome doesn't take solder. And then I soldered that wire onto the case of the socket of the light, so it has a good ground wire going to it, and it's the right color, red. I'm going to use green because I don't have any brown and green, so I'm going to use green wire here, hoping the next guy understands. And I will hook that up to the wire that goes to the tail light bulb tail light filament. Now, I don't know if you've seen these before. They're really cool. These are splices, heat shrink splices. You put them on, heat them, and the center solder melts and makes a soldered connection inside of an insulated connector. Really, really neat. You can buy them online, buy them up at Harbor Freight, they sell them, and you can buy small quantities. Of course, I buy huge quantities, boxes of 100, 250 of them at a time, because I use a lot of them because they're wonderful. They really are. So I'll show you how it's done when I do it. Now, one of my own idiosyncrasies is that I consider them to be a little too long. So I take them and I cut the end off. I cut that end off there. Hang on for a second. I'm going to put you down. Scooby-Dooby-Doo. And I'm going to cut the other end off and show you that I shorten them quite often when I drop it. I shorten them just because there's no real good reason. So I'm going to put that on there now, and then afterwards I cover it with black shrink just so people don't see it and get worried about it. So once again, watching out for the next guy. So I'm going to put this on. I'll show you the heating process in just a moment. I'll put this on the tripod and show you how it heats and melts. Okay, I've got this set up because I'm absolutely scared silly of damaging this beautiful paint. I put this heat deflector behind it. The wires are being held down so that I can take a video without them moving. You put the wires together so that they overlap underneath of the little solder joint right there. And then you hit it with the heat gun. I try to hit the end in order to have the splice grab the wires and hold it stationary, and then hit the solder point. Now, let's see if I can get in here closer. Let's see how this works. Let's see if we can actually see the solder melt. Here we go, putting heat on. All right there it's melting. So at this point, you've got the wires intertwined and it's actually melted, the solder. You've got a solder joint in there. Yea, verily, truly, honest to goodness, you really do have a good solder joint in there. Just putting the wires together is enough for the conductivity. The solder in this case is just icing on the cake. And it's completely sealed. It's waterproof, weatherproof, tight, and electrically great. And all you have to do now is take a tiny little bit of shrink, if you want, put it over top, and this is a connection that will serve just fine, thank you very much, for the rest of the life of the bike. Isn't that lovely? So now, at this point, all I have to do is put a piece of tubing over this whole thing and run it out here, and it's available for being connected to the bike once I decide what it is I'm going to do. All right, so now I have my my ground wire, brake wire, taillight wire, all approximately correctly color-coded for the next guy, and we'll run it through the hole. Let's get this out. It goes up through this grommet and comes out over here on the left. So that's where we are. So it's 10:30 now, and I'm gonna have to take a break. I have to take the boss over to the veterinarian because he's feeling a little poorly. We're all set here. I just tested the circuits. The lights work perfectly. I'm going to put this in some tubing, run it through here, and then resume the project when I get back from the veterinarian. Okay, it's 12:30 and back from the veterinarian. The boss is pretty good. He's a little rundown. He's 15 years old, and we think that we can have him for another year or so, the veterinarian and I. And got him on some meds now to make him feel better, breathe a little easier. So we're it's as good a news as possible. He's a good puppy. I've had him since my wife and I rescued him 15 years ago. So I lost my wife a few years ago, and I want to keep him as long as I can. So anyway, this wiring is in place and run through and sticking out here. I just did a test fit and found out that these two studs actually mate with this and go over the rear loop. And then this here at the bottom of the plate holder, this is what mates with this single hole back here. So I was wrong. This doesn't go up here. It actually stays down here and mates with that license plate holder. So that's good news. Now I did a preliminary fit, and I've got to put the ears on this guy behind this bolt. And I'm going to take this apart and find out if this is actually one piece or if it should go between this and another washer. So that's what I'm going to do now, is take it apart. I can see that those are very short, and I'm not sure what all these spacers are. So I get to explore this and find out how these mounts work. I put mine up against this on my bike. It's up against this surface with a washer on the outside. These are very thick washers or spacers. So I need to reconnoiter them, see what's happening. That's where we are. Moving along, I'll keep you apprised. All right, it's 2:30. The last video, when I said I'm going to start putting the tail section onto this bike, was at 12:30. That's 2 hours ago. Now, it's real hard to explain why it took 2 hours to put this tail section on this motorcycle. But believe me, it took 2 hours to put this tail section on this motorcycle. 2 hours, seriously. It took me 2 hours to put this tail section on this motorcycle, and I don't care if you believe me, and I don't care if you think I should have been able to do it in 5 minutes. I don't care if you yourself have personally put it on in 5 minutes. It took me 2 hours of hard work to get this tail section on this motorcycle. So just a little bit of frustration there. You might notice that I have the skyhook involved to support the bike while the jack supports the frame, just to make sure it never fell over. But I'm tired. Okay, so I'm gonna start working on getting the fender on now that I've got the tail section in place. That's where we are, 2 hours later. A little frustrated. Gonna do the fender now and see how that goes. Well, my goodness gracious sakes, it's almost 5 o'clock, and I've been on this all day. So tail section is in place. The fender is in place. The rear light assembly is properly bolted down. All the bolts underneath are tight and in place. The front is in place. You can see it down here, nice big fat fender washer. And going through to a spacer right there that makes up the gap between the triangular plate that's bolted to the bike right there. So I use a triangular plate facing down, a spacer and a bolt to hold the fender in the front. It's done. And it looks good. And I'll turn on the ignition. Okay, ignition is on. There's your tail light. Or actually, that's probably the brake light. I don't know. Let me see. No, that's tail light. That's brake light. So the pedal's not secured. So anyway, that's the tail light. Okay, calling it a day. It's been a full day. I'm tired. Go inside, and I don't know why the zoom's not working. All right, there you go. Looking good. I might try to place the oil tank tomorrow. Let you know.